The Haunted Lake. A few summers ago, my friends and I decided to spend a weekend at a remote lake in the woods. It was the perfect getaway. No cell service, no people, just us and nature. We rented a small cabin by the water and spent our days swimming, fishing, and exploring the woods. One evening, just as the sun was setting, we noticed something strange. There was a thick fog rolling in across the lake, which wasn't unusual for summer. But this fog seemed different. It was unnaturally thick and seemed to move in waves, almost like it was alive. We shrugged it off and started a campfire, thinking it was just another eerie but beautiful part of the setting. As night fell, the fog completely enveloped the cabin, and visibility dropped to just a few feet. We could barely see the lake anymore. That's when we heard it, a soft, almost musical humming coming from the water. At first, we thought it was the wind or maybe an animal, but the sound grew louder and more distinct. It was a woman's voice singing a haunting lullaby. One of my friends, curious and a little freaked out, grabbed a flashlight and aimed it at the lake. What we saw made my blood run cold. A figure was standing in the water just at the edge of the fog. It looked like a woman, her hair long and wet, but her face was pale, almost glowing, and she had no eyes, just dark, hollow sockets. We all froze, too scared to move. The figure started walking towards us, her feet not making any sound as they moved through the water. The singing grew louder, more intense, and it felt like it was coming from all around us, not just from the figure. Finally, someone screamed, and we all bolted back into the cabin, locking the door behind us. But the singing didn't stop. It echoed through the walls, growing louder and louder until it was deafening. We huddled together, too terrified to do anything but wait. When the sun finally rose, the singing stopped. We cautiously stepped outside and the fog was gone. The lake looked calm and peaceful, as if nothing had happened. But there on the shore were wet footprints leading from the water to our cabin door. And then they just stopped, as if whatever had made them had vanished into thin air. We packed up and left that morning, cutting our trip short. We later found out that the lake was rumored to be haunted by a woman who had drowned in there years ago, luring people into the water with her song. To this day, I can still hear that haunting lullaby in my nightmares. The abandoned summer camp. When I was a kid, my family would go camping every summer. One year, when I was about 12, we decided to check out a new spot, an old, rundown campground that had been closed for years. It was in the middle of the woods, far from any town or main road. The place had an eerie feel to it, with abandoned cabins, rusted playground equipment, and an old mess hall with broken windows. My parents thought it would be fun to explore, so we set up our tent near the entrance and spent the day wandering around the old camp. There were faded signs still hanging on some of the buildings, and I remember seeing the name of the camp, Camp Hollow Springs, painted in peeling letters on the side of the mess hall. As evening approached, my parents started a fire while I continued exploring. I found an old trail that led deeper into the woods and followed it, curious about where it would go. After about 10 minutes, I came across something strange. An old cabin that was hidden by the trees, almost completely overgrown by vines and moss. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. I walked up to the cabin and noticed the door was slightly open. I pushed it all the way open and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the floorboards creaked under my feet. Inside, there were old bunk beds, a few chairs and a table. But what really caught my attention was the wall at the back of the cabin. It was covered in scratches, deep and jagged, like someone had been clawing at it. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, a faint rustling, like someone was moving through the trees. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing there. The cabin was silent, but I felt like I wasn't alone anymore. A sense of dread washed over me, and I knew I needed to get out of there. I ran back to the campsite as fast as I could, not looking back. When I told my parents what I had seen, they just laughed it off, saying it was probably an animal that made the scratches. But that night, as we were sitting by the fire, I saw something in the distance. It was just at the edge of the woods, near the cabin I had found. It was a figure standing perfectly still, watching us. I tried to point it out to my parents, but by the time they looked, it was gone. They told me it was just my imagination, but I knew what I saw. We left the camp the next morning and I never went back. Years later, I learned that Camp Hollow Springs had been shut down after a series of mysterious disappearances. The campers were never found, but the locals believe something evil was in those woods, something that still watches and waits for anyone who dares to return.